Hey there, Heather, ho there. Chef Cutter Diamond welcoming you to yet another Cutter Top 10 sports video. And today we're going to be looking at the top 10 World Junior moments around. And there were a lot of them that were Canadian, but I decided to change them up to be non so Canadian. Anyway, wearing the the junior shirt of my hometown team, Kitchener Rangers. So got that going, and we're going to be talking about the Kitchener Rangers. But we're also talking about the World Juniors, and there are some Kitchener Rangers sprinkled in to the moment. All right, number 10 is Jonathan Tays in the shootout in 2007. Canada versus US semifinal. It was a huge semifinal over in Europe, as Canada would love to have won. We're looking for the third straight national championship. And of course, the Americans were standing in their way. Canada would have to face the United States in a shootout. After 3 rounds, if the two teams are tied in an international shootout, then a shooter from each team goes until one team scores and one team doesn't. Now, internationally, the rules are that you can pick the same guy over and over again, whereas in the NHL, you can't until everyone's used up. So, using that, Canada decided to go to Jonathan Tays not once, not twice, but thrice, scoring 3 goals in the shootout that way. However, Peter Mueller would match Tays shot for shot. But fortunately, on the third time, Mueller got stopped by Carey Price, giving Canada the gold medal chance and them winning the gold medal. It was one of the most unbelievable moments in Canadian junior history. Number 9 is Roberto Luongo's goaltending clinic. In 1999, Roberto Luongo was just a guy who was a couple years removed from being picked fourth overall by the New York Islanders in the uh, NHL draft. And a lot of people were just shocked by that. Of course, Luongo has the Leafs to thank after the Leafs traded away their first round pick to the Islanders for the one of Kenny Johnson. And then, of course, that blew up in the Leafs' face as they were actually the fourth worst team and had to give up that pick to the Islanders, who picked Luongo. Royal Luongo stood on his head, helping Canada get into the final, including a massive shutout against the Czechs in the semis. He would have Canada make the final against the Russians, but unfortunately, those pesky Russians just had to win in overtime, and poor Luongo was just beside himself. But yeah, Roberto Luongo tried his best and all that. Luongo would not stay on Long Island for long, as he would be traded to Florida in 2000 after the Islanders decided to make Rick DiPietro the number 1 pick in the 2000 draft. And that didn't work out so well for anybody. Luongo would do well for Florida, then Vancouver back to Florida, whereas DiPietro was injury prone with the Cupcakes. Number 8 is Peter Forsberg's fantastic moments. In 1992, well, the 93 tournament, with it being one of the last few with a round robin format, Peter Forsberg would beat up on all the other teams by scoring 31 points, including an 11-point effort against Japan, when Japan was decent enough to make the World Juniors. Unfortunately, though, Peter Forsberg, despite having a few key goals against Canada in their round robin game, would lose to Canada as what is his face? As I would say, oh, what is this? The Detroit guy, Hudson? No, as Randy Legacy stood on his head and gave Canada the win over Sweden. Yeah, Luongo Forsberg got 31 points, but unfortunately Sweden did not own the gold. That kind of sucked and all that. Number 7 is Connor Bedard, proving why he's a legend in the World Juniors. 2023 was huge for Canada. After a few key losses, they needed to do better. And in Halifax, when the World Juniors went Atlantic, he was producing and all that. As Bedard would help Canada do well. And of course, that was the that Canada played Czechia in the final, and then Bedard assisted on the game-winning goal. I can't remember who scored, but that's when we knew Connor Bedard was just producing. At number 6 is Sweden beating Russia in overtime in 2012. Another key moment. Well, honorable mention goes to Finland versus Sweden in Russia in 2016 when Kasperi Kapanen scored the winning goal at a wraparound in Finland. But anyway, Sweden beating Russia was huge. Canada got taken out by Russia in the semifinals, and there were still Canadian fans in there because gold medal games were expensive. So it was Sweden versus Russia, and everyone thought Russia was going to beat up on Sweden. But somehow, in some way, it was 0-0 through 60 minutes of play. They went through one 20-minute overtime before going to a shootout. But midway through the overtime, Mika Zibanejad got an on-off wing, somehow snuck the puck past Alex Georgiev, and Sweden won the game 1-0. Zibanejad now a New York Ranger, but it was just amazing. And Sweden, for the first time in 3 decades, were World Junior champions. They would see Finland win. I think Finland won a title. I can't remember, but yeah. But Sweden finally broke through, breaking the Canada-U.S. monopoly. Number 5 is Connor McDavid's job in 2015 in Toronto. So the Royals would be in Toronto and Montreal. One group stage in Toronto, one in Montreal, and then Toronto would host the medal round, whereas Montreal would do that for 2017. Anyway, Toronto promised a lot of things. Connor McDavid was 17, and this was his draft year because he would turn 18 before the September 15th cutoff date. But yeah, Connor, at 17 years old, still had a stellar performance on home ice, helping Canada break their 5-year goal drought and beating Russia in a thrilling final 5-4. Little did anyone know that Connor McDavid would just be prudent. He wore number 17 because he was 17. Of course, this was the draft that saw Buffalo try everything in their freaking power to tank, baby tank. The fans were cheering when Buffalo lost the game in overtime. You knew something was fishy. But the powers that be rewarded Buffalo's tanking by giving them the number 2 pick instead of the number 1 pick. Guess who got number 1? Edmonton, who had a habit of always getting the number 1 pick. And Connor McDavid went to Edmonton, and he's been part of a couple cup finals for Edmonton, and with no luck whatsoever. Buffalo didn't do that badly. They got Jack Eichel second overall, but Eichel got injured, and then once he got the surgery from Vegas after Buffalo traded him to Vegas, he's been producing, getting a major contract, and making Buffalo realize we just mishandled that guy. And number 4 is the 2005 Dream Team for Canada. Canada had luck on their side in 2005 because the NHL was on a lockout. Also in 95, when Canada hosted the World Juniors in Red Deer, Alberta, they also had the luck of the draw because, the NHL went into a lockout at that time, and the World Juniors players could play World Juniors and not be tied down to NHL deals and all that, NHL rosters. So what do they do? They end up 95. They were undefeated in pool play, and then 10 years later, with the lockout happening, and of course 2005 instead of 1995, the NHL decided to lock out the players for the season. Canada had a stacked roster. They had Sidney Crosby, they had Patrice Bergeron, they had Ryan Getzlaf, they had Corey Perry, they had Dion Phaneuf, and all that, to name a few players. The team crushed Russia in the gold medal 6-1, and it was a double Dion as Phaneuf finished a check on one Russian player and then bumped into another Russian player, and then Canada went on to score. But yeah, Crosby was not playing for Pittsburgh. Crosby was, the anointed number 1 pick in 2005, which Pittsburgh ended up beating Anaheim for. But Anaheim got a nice consolation prize. Corey Perry was a pretty good player. Patrice Bergeron played for Boston. He even scored an overtime winning goal in the 2004 NHL playoffs. But then he didn't have to play for Boston. He would beat down in the minors. Well, the AHL, he was be allowed to do that. Ryan Getzlaf was a duck as well. Yeah, that would be big. Number three is John Slaney, 1991. 1991 was in Saskatoon, and the fans wanted the gold. This was the first year of a major TV shift in Canada, as CBC would broadcast some World Junior games. Well, CTV did a few games as well, including Gretzky's efforts in 1978 with the tournament being in Montreal. But the fact of the matter is that CBC kind of had it sporadically and only on like weekends with Canada playing would they allow games to be broadcast. TSN had the bright idea. You know, they were a cable network. They didn't really have much to broadcast and all that. So they took a gamble and said, we'll tape every game, even games against in the other parts of Saskatchewan and all that. Anyway, John Slaney was a hero for Canada. Canada and the Soviets were in the final game of the pool play, the round robin. If the Soviets had scored a win over Finland, or a tie, I think it was, then the game against Canada would be moot. Canada would be playing for silver. The Soviets beat Canada 3-2. But yeah, Canada won 3-2. John Slaney from Newfoundland put the puck in the net, and Canada won 3-2. That was when Lindros and Falloon were on the team, and Trevor Kidd, and Canada got it and brought TSN lots of ratings, and that's why the World Juniors is on TSN. Number two is the punch out in Pierce Johnny. I know it's a dark moment, but it was a huge moment. So Canada was playing the Soviets in the final round robin game in 1987. No, I think Canada had one more game left, didn't they? Or was that later? No, never mind. Canada played the Soviets in Piroshchany, Czechoslovakia. Canada needed to win by 4 to win the gold. A win by any other method would have been a silver. They just needed, and they were going to get bronze even if they lost. The Soviets had nothing to play for, which was unusual. So the Soviets, I think, figured we'll rile Canada up. Canada was up 4-2, but unfortunately the Soviets started pounding them, and then a seemingly innocent scuffle turned into a bench clearing brawl. All the players and the goalies jumped up and were beat up in each other. The Soviets pretty much jumped off the bench first, but unfortunately Canada retaliated. The fact of the matter is that the officials, even the Norwegian referee, didn't know how to handle this in international hockey, so they turned the lights off, which didn't work out. So anyway, what are you gonna do? So anyway, the World Juniors happened. Canada and the Soviets, they said Canada would win 4-2. Unfortunately, though, both teams would be in a fight with the WIHF president, who basically decided to banish both teams. They would not be going to the awards dinner, and basically they would be taken off the plane, taken on the plane from Czechoslovakia back to their normal places without any stopping for anything. That's what happened to Canada. That's what happened to the Soviets. The Soviets, it didn't matter, but to Canada, it did matter, as they had been robbed of a medal. And of course, the CBC, when they did that game kind of live and all that, Brian Williams and Don Cherry were discussing all this whole stuff on CBC. Brian Williams saying that Canada got what they deserved by fighting like that. And Don Cherry said it was the Soviets that goaded us into it. And it would have been easy for the Soviets to pound our Canadian players and maybe a disqualification and maybe Canada wins the gold. But that is not how we play Canadian hockey. Brian Williams was basically making excuses for Canada to be given the disqualification. Don Cherry was not too happy with it, though. It actually made Don Cherry more into a positive person with his coach's corner and all that, and made Brian Williams look like a fool at times. But fortunately, they'll both would recover and all that. But number one is the miracle goal from Jordan Eberle, 2009. Canada was in trouble. They had won 4 straight gold medals, including the last one in Czech Republic when Matt Halschuk, Kitchener, we're in Kitchener Rangers for a reason, scored the winning goal in overtime. But in 2009, Canada was in trouble. They were down 5-4 to the Russians in the final minute. And then Filatov and a few Russian players tried to put the puck down the ice, but they failed miserably. And Canada managed to get it into the zone, And then a backhander found the stick of number 14, Jordan Eberle, who shoveled it past the goalie to make it 5-5. And Gordon Miller on TSN says, "Can you believe it?" Pierre McGuire says, "I can't, Gord, because the Russians didn't ice the puck down the way," and all that. It was amazing. Eberle, with 5.4 seconds left, scored the goal, giving Canada the tie. They went to the shootout. Canada won it, and then Canada would beat Sweden to win the gold medal. And Eberle's goal would be clutch. Eberle would put up a few more clutch goals the next term in 2010, but unfortunately, those pesky Maracano's had to win the gold on our turf. Damn it. Anyway, I'm jumped. I'm going to do.